Hi everyone, thanks for joining us for this webinar on counting people experiencing homelessness in the 2020 census. I hope you all are staying safe and healthy during this pandemic. As you know, Asian Americans Advancing Justice is working to ensure a full and accurate count of our communities in the 2020 census. And as a national hub, we are working to develop curriculum and materials to support your Get Out the Count work, including fact sheets, toolkits, webinars, social media graphics, translated materials, and more. And today, we are excited to dive deeper into the importance of the service-based enumeration operation and other operations that will count people experiencing homelessness in September, how the Census 2020 California Complete Count Committee is working to make sure people experiencing homelessness are counted fully and accurately, and how other organizations can take part in these final Get Out the Count efforts. Next slide, please. In recognition of the day, please join us for a moment of silence in remembrance of those who lost their lives on September 11th. Next slide, please. As many of you may know, this webinar is the 22nd installment of our monthly census webinar series, which we launched in August 2018. And if you missed any of our previous webinars and want to tune in, you can access them with the links on this slide and also the next slide. Today, we are really pleased to have two great colleagues with us. First, we have Meghan Maury, who is the Policy Director at the National LGBTQ Task Force. And their work spans a broad range of issue areas, but focuses heavily on economic justice, criminal justice, and data collection. Meghan uses their personal and professional experience to inform their work and is particularly focused on how economic systems and the criminal legal system impact people live at the intersections of multiple marginalized identities. Didas Katagi is the director of the California Complete Count Census 2020 office, the outreach and communications campaign to ensure a complete count of the hardest to count Californians. From 2012 to 2018, she served on the US Census Bureau's National Advisory Committee on Race, Ethnicities, and Other Populations, including serving as chair from 2015 to 2018. We will have Q&A at the end of this webinar, and you can use the Q&A box to send your questions. And if you have any questions during the presentations, please also use the Q&A box to send us your questions. This webinar is recorded, and we will send out a recording and the presentation after the webinar. And check out our census website at countusin2020.org for all of our webinars and accompanying summary blogs. This website also hosts our toolkit, fact sheets, partner resources, and more. And we have a COVID-19 page with the latest information on changing Census Bureau operations and updated field guidance. And you can find information on Census Bureau operations and the latest changes announced translated on the different language pages under our main resources. If you have any questions, please call us. Advancing Justice, AAJC, and API Vote are ready to take your census questions. So call the hotline at 844-2020-API or 844-202-0274 for answers to your questions in English and multiple Asian languages. This hotline is strictly for answering questions regarding the census, such as how can I fill out the census online, or what languages is the paper form available in. This hotline is not meant for filling out the census. So if you wish to fill out the census on the phone, please call the Census Bureau's questionnaire assistance phone lines. And on the next slides, you can find sample posts and shareable graphics in our toolkit. Without further ado, I will turn it over to our first speaker, Meghan.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me back to your webinar series. It's always a fantastic time, and I really appreciate the breadth of topics that you all have covered. I'm here today to talk a little bit about the operations of how the Census Bureau reaches out to people experiencing homelessness. But before I do, I just want to remind folks of the project that we've been working on around the census. We run a campaign called Queer the Census, where we try to make sure that every LGBTQ person feels empowered to get counted in the census. For many LGBTQ people, the census has a little bit of mixed emotions. It doesn't capture data on sexual orientation and gender identity, so we have to get over kind of the initial hurdle of making sure that LGBTQ people understand why it's still important. And we have to deal with a lot of the same fears and concerns that many other communities have about confidentiality of census data and whether or not the census data can be used for other sort of activities. Hopefully by now we all know census data are confidential, and there's a whole network of folks who are ready to fight back if there's any breaches to that data confidentiality. Over the last few years, several years, many years, we've really been successful in reaching millions of LGBTQ people with this campaign through organizing activities, webinars like the one you're on now, and quite a lot of digital outreach these days in the land of virtual organizing. So if you go to the next slide, I'm just going to jump right in on how the Census Bureau counts people experiencing homelessness. And for me, it's always helpful to remember the conceptual grounding of how the census is kind of built, right? So as we all know, the census conducts most of its operations by writing down all the addresses in the US and then counting the people who live at them. And those addresses include a lot of sort of non-traditional living spaces like group quarters, like that include places like military barracks, student housing, prisons and jails, anywhere where people live in a congregate setting, but also includes places like transitory locations like marinas and campgrounds. And within those sort of ancillary operations, that group quarters operation, the Census Bureau realizes that there's still not a good way for them to capture folks who don't have a residential address. And they do that through a sub-operation of group quarters called service-based enumeration. And then within service-based enumeration is another sub-operation that we all refer to as TINSEL because it's fun to say, but that stands for Targeted Non-Sheltered Outdoor Locations. So let's dive a little bit deeper into what those two operations look like. If we go to the next slide, service-based enumeration really is what it sounds like. The Census Bureau writes down a big list of all the service providers that work with people experiencing homelessness. That includes homeless shelters and intimate partner violence shelters, but also places like soup kitchens and food pantries, as well as mobile food vans that pass out food around in a geographic area. Through that service-based enumeration, they sort of schedule appointments to go meet with folks at those shelters and either do enumeration on the spot, so they're counting people who are accessing services that day, or collect a sort of list of the folks who have accessed that shelter in that time period. They do the same sort of thing with soup kitchens, food pantries, other food access sites as well. And then if we go to the next slide, the last sort of piece of this puzzle is this TINSEL program, where the Census Bureau goes out over a 24-hour period and attempts to count people who are living in targeted, non-sheltered outdoor locations. Those might be encampments. They might be folks who are living, under bridges or in parks or other places where people regularly spend the night. The Census Bureau has a pretty similar plan for how they conduct this operation. They meet with service providers and community leaders and individuals experiencing homelessness to find out where people stay most often, create a big list, and then go to those places in that 24-hour period and attempt to count folks. If you go to the next slide, I just wanted to make sure that people had clarity about the timeline. The SBE operation and the TINSEL operation are really temporally refined. The rest of the Census Bureau count, as we all know, has been going on since mid-March, well, actually since January in some areas in Alaska, and continues on through the end of September or the end of October, depending on how current litigation plays out. But SBE and TINSEL are really just a very short period of time. So the service-based enumeration, when they go to all those shelters, food pantries, mobile food vans, occurs between the dates of September 22 and September 24. And again, those shelters and other locations have actually make appointments with the Census Bureau for when the Census Bureau is going to show up to do that enumeration. Tinsel happens from midnight on September 23rd to midnight on September 24th. For that operation, the Census Bureau does not make appointments, which we would love to see that change for 2030, but they just go to the encampments and other outdoor locations in their area in that 24-hour period and count the folks who are staying there at the time. Because the population of folks that are being counted through these operations, the Census Bureau believes that they're highly mobile populations, that they move around a lot, either within a geographic area or between geographic areas. So for that reason, the Census Bureau chooses to count them where they are at the time that they get counted, not where they were on April 1st. So if you're a person who lives in a residence, they ask you to report who was living with you on April 1st. For this operation, it's a little bit of a shift. It's where you're at when you're counted. There may be some inaccuracies built into that assumption, but for now, it's how the Bureau conducts the count. And then on the back end, they try to sort of deduplicate if those folks have already been counted through another sort of operation. They try to deduplicate that person from the count. So on the next slide, I thought it was important for us to pause for a second and think about the scope. One of the questions that the folks at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC, asked us was, how are we shifting our engagement on census since COVID hit? And I have a lot of the same answers that everyone does. We're doing everything online now. So that's, that's the biggest shift for us. We had a pretty robust ground game planned. But when it comes to this operation in particular, it's not just a shift in how we're engaging with folks, but also in what the operation or the scope of the operation is overall. So pre-pandemic, the Census Bureau expected to count roughly 500,000 people through these SBE and Tinsel operations. Generally, estimates of people who are experiencing, sort of street-based homelessness hover around 500,000 people on any given night. Though, estimates of how many people experience homelessness in a given year are more like 2.7 million folks. But since coronavirus has hit, the landscape of who is experiencing homelessness and housing instability has shifted pretty dramatically. We know that as eviction protections are expiring across the country, even as there's this temporary protection in place from the federal government, about 30 to 40 million people are at risk of losing their houses, of being evicted. So that really is a dramatic change in the number of people who are at risk of homelessness and housing instability. Economists are estimating that rates of homelessness are going to increase 45 to 50% in the next couple of months. There's really a lot of shifts, and honestly, those shifts have started to happen already. Even though those eviction protections are in place in many states around the country, eviction protections aren't all they're cut out to be. There's still a lot of folks who are losing their homes due to economic insecurity related to the pandemic. And people's safety nets are a little bit less secure. So while pre-pandemic, there might have been, a handful of friends you might be able to stay with because of concerns around social distancing, because of sort of really millions of people in the country being tight on funds. Those safety nets, from what we've heard from people, are a little bit less secure than they were pre-pandemic. So the scope of this operation has changed immensely, and because of that, a lot of our work on this particular issue area is making sure that the Census Bureau's rescheduled operations for SBE and Tinsel really are as effective as they can be. So let me jump right into that. If you go to the next slide, some of the concerns we've really had that we've been flagging for the Census Bureau and trying to pass through is, one, the provider landscape has shifted as much as the community of people experiencing homelessness, where pre-pandemic, in large cities, big shelters were the norm, really large congregate care spaces where hundreds or even thousands of folks were staying in one building. There's a shelter right down the street from me here that housed several thousand single men before the pandemic. That shelter has drastically reduced its capacity to give people space they need for social distancing in that space, and instead are housing folks in much smaller shelters or in individual rooms around the city. That's the case in a lot of geographies around the US, and there are new shelters springing up across the US to help meet the need, given the additional people who are experiencing homelessness and housing instability right now. The Census Bureau originally made its list of shelters and services to contact in February. That list should have changed nearly 100% since then, because we know that the provider landscape has changed that much. But unfortunately, the Census Bureau hasn't had a lot of capacity to update that list. They're really relying on shelters to self-identify to be included in that list. So we've really been pushing the Bureau to do more proactive outreach, but also making sure that shelters and service providers know to be included and how to kind of get in on that. Second big concern we've been working on is staffing concerns. In 2010, the Census Bureau hired roughly 60,000 folks to conduct these operations. In 2020, they were intended to hire about 45,000 folks. From what we're hearing, hiring's been a little bit of a struggle for the Bureau, and we're definitely concerned that they won't have sufficient staff to undertake this operation in September. So we're trying to make sure that staffing stays up to speed. The third is the Census Bureau really relies on community partners to make this work effective, and community partners just don't have the capacity that they had in prior censuses because they're dealing with a pandemic. So, you know, that's definitely a concern of ours. And then finally, we could mitigate many of these harms if we made self-response more accessible to people experiencing homelessness. But because many of the places where people experiencing homelessness access the internet are closed down right now, like libraries, community centers, and other places with free Wi-Fi, it's more difficult for us to work with people experiencing homelessness to self-respond. So those are all just sort of considerations we have in mind as we engage in our advocacy. On the next slide, which I think is the last slide. Oh yes, we have just a couple of engagement recommendations, or just to give you a kind of a view on what we're doing. The first is engage directly with the community. So many people experiencing homelessness don't receive a lot of direct outreach from advocacy organizations, our community, or the media. And really the best way to get people experiencing homelessness to participate in these operations is to talk directly to them. So to the extent that you feel comfortable, I know people definitely have concerns around social distancing, but to the extent you feel comfortable engaging directly with community, making sure that they know when these operations are taking place, feel empowered to participate, and feel empowered to assert their right to be counted. I think that's really the one way for us to engage these communities. Number two is to engage with service providers. Again, as I mentioned, the Census Bureau has not got a real comprehensive list of the providers that are out there now. So making sure that providers know how to get included in that list is really critical. And finally, there are a number of media outlets, particularly in major metro areas around the country, that we just sort of generally refer to as street media or street papers. In DC and California and New York, there are papers like Streetwise and Street Sense that are actually written for and about and by people experiencing homelessness, and are really meant to be, are really sort of a media and news source for folks experiencing homelessness. So if you have a media campaign already, engaging with those outlets as well can be a really good way to make sure that folks are getting the information they need. So that's what we're doing. I'm really excited to be here and sharing this information for you, and really happy to dig in further on any of the nerdy details if I can. But I couldn't be more excited to turn it over to Dita, who is my census hero.
Well, hello there. Hi, Megan. Hello, everyone. you can see me, I'm wearing this mask, but I'll take it off in a minute because it's probably hard to hear me. But I want to thank you guys for the opportunity to participate today. AAAJ, you know, we've been partnering with your local partner, AAAJ California. They've been a lead partner for our API communities and doing outreach. So I really want to say a quick thank you to everybody there. As he mentioned, this is my third decennial census in California's outreach efforts, and by far the most challenging. I have this mask on, but I'm going to go ahead and take it off. I'm wearing it actually inside because the air quality here is so poor with all of California and the West Coast on fire. And so the air quality actually in my house, I had to close the windows because I think my smoke alarm was going to go off, but it really represents kind of, you know, we wear it outside for the pandemic, but it presents even more of a challenge to our vulnerable populations who are unsheltered and unhoused. The air quality index is off the charts in terms of hazardous in many, many, many areas in the state, and likely impacting our enumerators and what they can do and how effective they can be out in the field. Just can we go to the next slide? So as I was just doing kind of my intro here, Meghan and I have worked together on the National Advisory Committee, which is a super amazing committee who is really linked in with the national efforts with Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, AAJA, NALEO, all these folks that are doing amazing work nationally, and we need to continue. I really depend heavily on that whole national group to really keep California in the loop about what's going on. So let's go to the next slide. So for those of you who aren't from California, you should know this being my third decennial census for the state, we started investing early on in 2000. We put our own California money in because we knew that Californians know California's best and that the federal government may not do the best job in terms of educating and motivating and getting Californians to respond. This time around, I mentioned not only is this the most challenging census ever, but California has invested an amazing $187 million in outreach and education statewide, really activate our hardest to count populations because they're very, very difficult to reach and difficult to motivate to actually count. But we've used data, we've used amazing deep mapping and all the data sets to have a really strategic campaign that really pinpoints, you know, why an area is hard to count, who are the vulnerable populations, and where are they and why are they, and how we best reach them. And how we best reach them, of course, is through trusted messengers. Because we know from our experience in 2000, where we outpaced the entire country in terms of response rates, that having trusted messengers on the ground, in fact, I will say, I think California coined that phrase that everybody now uses back in 1999. That's a little retro throwback Friday here. We have over 155 contractors, I call them partners, including schools, community-based organizations, but we also are funding counties, tribal governments, and we have a media campaign as well. We couldn't do this without them. You know, I'm just sitting up here in Sacramento, and I used to travel the state a lot before the pandemic, but we could not do this work without the work of our partners. And underneath those partners, they have additional subcontractors. So we kind of weave this blanket of coverage, this network, where you at where people are in terms of their jurisdictions, counties, governments, regional, we've done regional partnerships, who they are in terms of looking at vulnerable populations. And oops, sorry, my dog. The homeless population is also one of our vulnerable targeted populations. Whenever I put my mask on, he thinks we're going for a walk, so sorry. Come here. And basically, so where they are, who they are, and how do we reach them, and that's through our sector outreach. Sectors include unions and businesses. They also include health clinics. They also include what's some other ones? Schools is also a sector, and so we have a lot of different ways that we're weaving together with our partners. So next slide, please. I'm apologizing, sorry. Okay, so let's talk about the homeless population. As Meghan mentioned nationwide, over 500,000 at any point. You know, these are HUD numbers that we're looking at. But when we look at California, it's really, oh, am I muted? She says, okay. Well, you guys can hear me, yeah? Yes, okay. So as we look at California's numbers, it's about 151,000 is what we're looking at just this snapshot in time. This is from the 2009 point in time count. But if you look at the other states, just to give you guys an idea, New York is at 92,000. And I would stand to say, and Megan can correct me, that they're probably very densely located in a pretty compact area. Florida, 28,000, and Texas at 25,000. So I just wanted to give as an example, Los Angeles County, which is 5,000 square miles, right? It's a little bit larger than, say, Manhattan, where many are. But of that over 50,000 in LA County, 42,000 of them are unsheltered. And we can't go to a service-based enumerator and say, hey, how many people, clients do you have coming here? So that's really our TINSEL, our targeted non-sheltered outdoor location. That's our TINSEL population. So, you know, when we look at California's population as a whole, we're expected to have over 40 million people here. Expect that we would have a large homeless population. So while 1 in 9 Americans lives in California, we have roughly 1 out of 4 homeless individuals living in our state. So HUD reported that California's increase in homeless population since the prior year was larger than all other states' increases combined. So finally, notable is that if you look at that 42,000 people located in a 5,000 square mile area, I guess the question I have is, you know, when we do this work, which is September 23rd through the 24th, midnight to midnight, as you saw in Megan's presentation, we've asked many people, including the Census Bureau, how many enumerators is it actually going to take to count nearly 42,000 people across LA, 5,000 square miles in 24 hours? And they said they'll go a little bit farther, but I posed that question. But let's talk about what has really helped. Without a doubt, COVID-19 has altered our ability to safely conduct person-to-person outreach, which was really the key both in 2000 and 2010 to our success in getting folks, you know, counted. Our most impactful way, again, is in person. So we're adjusting. Our partners have adjusted. People experiencing homelessness, you know, this delay has created a 6-month delay. But I also want to point out, as I did at the beginning, that California has been hit with a rash of wildfires, which has displaced many communities from events. And the most important, during the most important and challenging census of our lifetimes, we've seen a wave of innovation from our partners and are continuing to reach hardest to count Californians in innovative ways. And so I wanted to share with you what our partners are doing. And if you can go to the next slide. You know, home base is on the line. One of our partners, when I talked about sectors, you know, I had the faith-based sector, healthcare, is home base, and it's our lead contractor. As most of you know, that sometimes it's hard to find one statewide contractor. We look for a very long time because in dealing with continuous care and homelessness, it's very localized and very regional. But we were really thankful, Monica and her team at home base, and it's really taking the lead for us to, I guess, herd those cats, right? To really figure out how do we reach the population. And we really knew that it was going to be sort of, I don't want to say interagency wise. So we really focused on making sure County Office of Education, you know, higher ed, state and local governments, of course, counties have points of services, Head Start, food banks, and health clinics all take a part in providing services, but all can play an incredible role in helping reach our homeless and underhoused populations. So home base has done a wonderful job. They've done a number of things. They've developed messaging and collateral for partners to disseminate up from the U.S. Census Bureau. I know those updates keep coming and changing, but we have a nice network that they're able to give them the latest and the greatest. It's for the messaging that they've done is both for service providers, general outreach coordinators, and individuals experiencing homelessness. So Homebase also supports our continuums of care and our census office partners in sharing locations for Service-Based Enumeration and Tinsel, and making sure that the Census Bureau knows where they should conduct in-person interviews or collect the administrative records. I think many on the ground have probably experienced some confusion there, and so Homebase has been really focused on it, because I know a lot of us out there are trying to do so many different things. So thankful again that Homebase is really focused on this. In August 2020, over 40 counties have submitted new and updated service-based enumeration and Tinsel locations with the Census Bureau through the ad template. And then that is, we do it to their local offices, and you have to say, are you guys getting this? And then the question remains like, how are you prioritizing where you're going, right? And then the third question is, and on that day, are you going where we told you you should probably go? And so I know some of our localities are working directly with their ACOs, saying, here's our list, and here's some things you need to know about each of these locations. Like, this area might be a little sketchier, you might need, some reinforcements and safety. This area, is open. You might want to bring a cultural navigator. So they're able to give the Census Bureau, because let's face it, they're enumerators that they're hiring temporarily. Are they even going to know anything culturally about how to manage and work with people experiencing homelessness? And are they even going to be from the area, right? Probably not, if they have 45,000 temporary workers. So the Census Bureau, Homebase also gave the Census Bureau our temporary COVID shelters. I don't know if you know, here in California, the governor launched during the beginning of the pandemic a project known as Project Room Key or Home Key, which was taking people that were experiencing homelessness and contracting with hotels and motels to give them a safe place to isolate and to have shelter. Base also hosted an informational webinar on service-based enumerations, and they have a direct line of contact with our Los Angeles Regional Census Center. We can also link that webinar, it's been recorded. But given the size of California and the large population of people experiencing homelessness, it is all hands on deck. So as I mentioned, the County Offices of Education, they have a home liaison to staff families with school-age children. The California's higher ed also, because some students are living in their cars, right? So to make sure that we are in touch with them so that they know how to be counted. The Head Start Network also, with families with young children. And then there are, again, our food banks, our health clinics throughout the state. They've all been really helping to figure out how do we tackle this. So our California state agencies, the Department of Social Services and other frontline departments have helped. People are doubled up. There's a lot of education that needs to be done. And I know, as you know, that there have been a lot of operational challenges. And so here is how we think a structure to overcome some of these situations. Can we move to the next slide? So there you go, just next slide. So we've done a lot, but there's still a lot that needs to be done. So here's kind of just a structure to think about it, similar to what Meghan was saying. Connect with your area census office. If you don't know who the homeless coordinator is in that local office, you need to know who they are pretty soon, because September 22nd is coming up. I know many local census offices, there's been some turnover, but stay on it, know who they are. Help folks prepare for the visits in the local communities. I love that Meghan mentioned the street media, and a lot of our media and outreach is geared towards hard to count, not necessarily our homeless population. So being able to engage in street media and do other kind of wild postings that are out in areas where we know that they're circulating during the day is a great way to reach people. And then finally, sharing the dates of the in-person visits with community members with accurate messaging. So on the preparation, it's really about your staff and volunteers. Make sure your team knows the logistics in advance of your count day, which I think we all would like to know. So again, that's all about connecting with your local area census office and knowing when they're going to arrive or not. Hoping they'll share that with you. I know right now there's some questions about can we use sort of cultural navigators that know that. I think if the party sort of the administrative line is no, we can't, I still think your volunteers should be ready, because I think that when it comes on the ground, people are going to, the enumerators are going to need our help for sure. So share the dates. Organizations can start preparing the communities about, again, what it will look like, but really messaging is clear, and we have fact sheets that we can share, but two key messages are that you can complete the census using the address where you may receive shelter or food, bank, or you could respond without an address listed. Information is totally confidential and protected, and it can't be used at all. So those are kind of just like two messages that we definitely want to get out there. Again, we have a tool and messaging that we can share. Home Base has been amazing with being responsive about that and putting that out there. But in closing, because I know we have a lot of questions, I want to thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you. I understand firsthand the importance of stakeholder engagement and how all of you out there are really trying to do everything you can. And this is like a 3-day thing, really 24 hours. There hasn't been a lot of detail, and we're hoping and Meghan push really hard that there'll be more details about how we can truly get organized, because the census is absolutely a perfect example of how people need to take care of others and get involved, because it's our community. And it's not just for the year, it's not just this election cycle, but it's for the entire decade. So thank you very much, and if there's questions.
Absolutely. It's the next 10 years. It's a big deal. And so Meghan and Ditas, thank you for being here with us. Meghan, thanks for walking us through how service-based enumeration is actually done. You brought up a lot of really important considerations, and shelters, soup kitchens, food access sites, encampments, bridges, and parks. There are so many places where our communities receive services at or may spend time at, and the Census Bureau needs to count our communities where they are and understand how to count our highly mobile populations, especially right now. And September 22nd is coming up quick, and it sounds like there's a lot of outreach to our communities and to service providers and media that all of us Get Out the Count partners can help with to make sure that the changing landscape during the pandemic is accounted for in the Census Bureau's outreach. And Ditas, great mask. I'm loving your census swag and your background. And we're keeping everyone in California and in the West in our thoughts. And thank you for sharing your wisdom from the past 3 decennial censuses. The administration, this pandemic, and the wildfires, this is certainly the most challenging census ever. And you're absolutely right. It's led to a lot of innovation and creativity in California and across the country. And that's really something that advocates and service providers should be so proud of. And we do have our work cut out for us, and there's a lot to get done before September 22nd. And enumerators definitely need our help. And so I want to open it up to our audience. To ask questions, you can use the Q&A box, type in your questions, or you can use the chat box if you'd like. And I will turn it over to my colleague, Rima, who has been running technology for us to facilitate Q&A.
Thanks, Bessie, and thank you so much to our speakers for sharing their wealth of knowledge. So yeah, as Bessie mentioned, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box or the chat box, or ask to be unmuted and ask your questions.
I just wanted to point out in the chat box that I think that's from Monica from Home Base. She mentioned that the Census Bureau has recommended that all service providers get in contact with their local area census office before September 17th. So that's next Thursday, right? To make sure, yeah, they get an appointment scheduled for service-based enumeration. Flag that if you're, if they haven't gotten an appointment, then we need to make sure and be proactive about getting that on the books, or they won't get.
Yeah, for sure. The Bureau nationally has said, as long as you contact us by the 21st, we'll make you an appointment. But area census offices have been like, we're really trying to get everybody to contact us by the 17th. I'm sure for them it's hard to, squeeze in those appointments at the last minute and make sure that they have adequate scheduling. So I can't blame them for wanting to have a due date a little bit earlier, but obviously as soon as possible, would be the most helpful for those ACOs.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Megan. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, so we have one question. What's one action item to take before September 22nd and one to take between September 22nd and the 24th to help with this process?
I would say one thing that anyone can do from their home is they can call 5 shelters in their area and just ask them if they've already made an appointment to have an enumerator come out to their location. And if not, let them know how to connect with an ACO. It's one easy thing that anybody can do. Shelters it may take you a minute to get to the right person on the phone, but it's definitely an easy way to help out. If you are in an area, or if you're a person who feels comfortable going outside, doing that same work with encampments or other locations where lots of people stay can be really helpful too. Like not every encampment is structured this way, but many encampments, there are community leaders who make sure that folks are around when events are happening, and it can be one great way to help out. And sort of like an intermediate thing you can do too is talk to shelter providers about their street outreach. So many shelters have a street outreach program that regularly is working with folks who are experiencing street-based homelessness. So in addition to their shelter program, there's a program that they run that interacts directly with people who aren't staying in a shelter. And getting connected with the folks who are running that street outreach work can be another great way to make sure that folks are who are experiencing homelessness and not staying at a shelter can get connected into this process.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Megan. We have a question from Connie Lowe. How does everyone know how to find which one their AOC is? There's 7 AOCs. Oh my God, I'm saying AOC instead of ACO. There are just 7 ACOs just for LA County. Because if you contact the wrong ACO, they'll just mark you as out of scope.
So I think we have a map of the ACOs in the area, but you can also email us if they want to know which ACO covers that. I just wanted to add to Megan's that if you're contacting that service-based provider, you can also get a poster. I think there's posters that we can put into the webinar chat. Bureau has it, a sample poster that you can say, print out for them and say, hey, can you put this up? And warn that, the Census Bureau is coming on those dates. And as Megan said, if, you feel comfortable going outside and interacting, I always think it's nice to get, a Costco-sized thing of granola bars or something, and put some stickers on it that basically say, don't forget to be counted, and they're gonna come out those days. Any way to just let folks know, not to be afraid and to cooperate. Continue to be worried about starting at midnight, but I think if we can do some pre-work, our folks that are out there, it'll help quite a bit. And Marcy just said, go ahead and email her, and she can share the ACO list. And also, there's a sample poster.
Yeah, and if you're outside of California and you're struggling with knowing what your ACO is, another sort of just workaround for everyone is if you go on, I'm not going to read you the whole website link, but there's a whole, if you contact your regional office, they can make sure that you're connected to the area census office that is appropriate too. And I'll link the regional office contact info into the chat.
Yeah, I think Monica might have put that in there. I'm just looking at it in the chat. They're on it. So, well, I would just ask Marcy and Monica if there's anything else we should share. I know she's putting a lot of great information into the web chat.
And we'll also make sure all the links being dropped into the chat box are circulated via email afterward.
Yep, thank you so much for sharing the details. Does anyone else have any questions?
So I don't know if it's a question, but it's been asked by some of my partners out there of, and maybe Megan can answer this, do they have to wait till September 22nd through 24th, or can they go out to encampments if they see folks and offer them an iPad to be counted as a non-ID response? Is that a no-no? Can they do that? What's your
People can absolutely do that, and I encourage it, especially if you know an encampment is new or is moved and probably isn't on the list of places that the Census Bureau is going to do outreach to. I would prioritize doing that kind of work in those spaces, but then in any space, everyone is entitled to self-respond to the census. They don't have to wait for the Census Bureau to come and enumerate them. And if you haven't done it before, I encourage you to go on to my2020census.gov, click the button that says, I do not have a census ID, and just go through those initial screens to see there's in the place where you would enter a residential address, there's actually a button that says, I do not have a street address. On the next page, it asks about whether you have a rural route address, but on the next page, it asks if you were experiencing homelessness. If you were, there's actually some coaching in the system that helps people understand how to describe the location where they're staying, to make sure that the Census Bureau has a way to kind of geocode them on the back end. And it can be helpful to kind of take a look at those screens before you're out doing outreach with people one-on-one to make sure that you're not stumbling through how to walk them through those pages. But it is pretty easy for anyone experiencing homelessness to self-respond. The Census Bureau really has made significant improvements to guiding people through that process for 2020.
And again, I'm going to stress again that being able to do street media, because we have a media campaign in California, and it's geared towards low response rates. I think we're really wanting to make sure that if locally you can do some street media, nationally, we're hopeful. We got contacted just this morning, the surprise to say, hey, if we can line up some funders, we'd love to target really locations of encampments. For me, I like the wild postings where they're, you know how sometimes they put up those 4x8 sheets of plywood, you know, because of the protests that are going on. I love when they do wild postings on those, in those areas, or up on the sides of chain link fences, or on, I don't think you can do it on underpasses, but you know, they're wild posting and they're only going to be up for a week. I'm not saying that's legal, but to be able to get that message in front of them, and not just some billboard that maybe they'll look up and see, but really knowing where those encampments are, where people experiencing homelessness congregate, and getting the messaging out there, again, with posters, or, you know, I just imagine, remember how you used to put up like concerts, you put them up on that thing and you would like paper it there. I mean, that stuff still works. It's old school. But for this population, you know, putting it where their eyes are going to see it, not digitally necessarily, but you know, right there in front of them. So I encourage that. If any other people have extra dollars where, you know, hire some college students to go out and paper or what have you, I still think, that would work. I mean, I don't know, Meghan, you're younger and hipper than I, but
I do think all that street marketing is incredibly effective, and you know, it's pretty rare for it's pretty rare for people to do to create advertising and messages that is actually targeting people experiencing homelessness. It's often, you know, people hope that other messages might reach people experiencing homelessness, but they're not taking the time or the energy or the money to directly target that population. And as with any community, seeing messages that are built for you is much more effective than seeing messages that are generic and not built for you. So I definitely think street marketing is a great way to go. If you have capacity to do it, it's really exciting. And I do know that the Census Counts campaign will be creating some materials that folks can use. So for those purposes too. So I'm excited to see that come out.
Awesome. We actually have another question from Jason, and Dita, this might be for you. When would we know if the Census Bureau plans to make any adjustments to SBE or ETL campsites due to wildfires, or would the CB be open to extending the SBE period due to these? Dita,
There we go. Yeah. So Jason, thank you for the question. So, working with the LA RCC, they have, mentioned that they're willing to do what it takes to, count everyone. And, I think I want to take that on face value, but I want to be able to push them like, okay, do you really mean that? Because again, I think you're down in LA. I'm concerned just as much that how are they going to count that many people in that short of time? But I think with Homebase and others that are working directly with the ACOs, we're at the 11th right now. Let's look at the calendar. Let's keep in pretty close contact with the ACO and Kelsey and Camila that are there at the Los Angeles Regional Census Center. And, the fires are really, day by day. But I think we also have the ability to push on them, considering that we are in a state of emergency. They have claimed, at least I saw in the Guillermo, the Congressional Center, that they are going to temporary fire shelters for folks who have been impacted by the fires, because technically if you lost your home, you're experiencing homelessness too, even if they were counted back in April 1, right? Or they didn't answer, and now they're part of non-response follow-up. The U.S. Census Bureau has a responsibility to be able to go there, make sure that those folks weren't on their near-food list, and that to make sure that they're counted. So we got to continue to push the Census Bureau. They're facing unbelievable pressures put upon them by Department of Commerce and others to really crunch the enumeration and their field operations. And so we need to, A, hold them accountable, B, passionate that a lot of the pressures are way above them, and C, help them in any way that we can. And then finally, D, I'll stop at D, do what we need to do, as Meghan said, to get people to self-respond, right? For me, self-response, regardless if you're experiencing homelessness or not, just any Californian should be getting on and answering self-response, because it's going to be way more accurate than somebody, my next door neighbor, them to find out what I am, right? Like, I don't know, I think 2 people, maybe 1 lives there. She's some kind of Asian, like that's not helpful, right? Some kind of Asian, right? So really urging people that you can self-respond, because I don't want anybody else, speaking for me. I don't want, I want people to know that they are empowered to have their own voice, to self-identify any way they want on any of those categories, not have other people put their sort of opinions on who we are and how we're counted.
Thank you. So everyone, it sounds like we have some homework. So before you start your weekend, pick up the phone, call 5 local shelters, and make sure they've reached out to the Census Bureau and have scheduled time to be included in the operations between September 22nd and 24. So do that today. With this group on the webinar, we can reach 150 shelters. So we all have a role to play, and we need to get at the count. Thank you, Meghan. Thank you, Ditas, for being with us today. Thanks to everyone who joined the webinar. Again, this is recorded, so we will send out a copy of the presentation, the recording, and some of the links that were dropped in the chat box during Q&A. And we look forward to being in touch. So thank you, everyone, for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.